Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Happy Friday to everyone. I'm your host, Manny. I got another good set of story for you guys here today. Episode before the weekend. A lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of comments and a lot of actions in free agency that I thought were interesting. Starting with the Chip Shot story of the day. I modified it a little bit to just focus in on one story that I could talk about to kick off the show. Instead of trying to fit two and rush through them, I'm just going to focus in on one, but still around the theme of, off the field, comments, actions, away from games and stuff that I found interesting. So we're going to start with that, surrounding Antonio Pierce and some comments that he made about Patrick Mahomes. The next story will be Terry Bradshaw giving his 2 cents on what he thought about the whole Steelers quarterback situation and sticking up for Kenny Pickett on the Rich Eisen show when he was asked about it. Then later in the show, I'll get into Saquon Barkley and what his latest actions could mean to potentially predict his next free agent team. He's been active on social media, so I'll dig into that and kind of explain that whole scenario. Then I'll wrap it up with a most likely to scenario that I thought was pretty interesting. More likely to return to the playoffs this next season between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Los Angeles Chargers. Two very fascinating teams in different spots right now in respect to their quarterbacks, coaches, organizations, the overall roster as a whole. In two different spots, but at the same time, I find them very similar in a lot of different aspects. So I'll break those down in the last part of the show. But before I jump into the Chip Shot segment of the episode, I would like to please remind you guys to like and follow the show. There's always a lot of questions that we see on various shows on the network. So if you have a question, please make sure to use the tip and donations link running across the ticker down below me. If you can't see the link, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, if you're unable to see the link, it's streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question. It pops up there at the top of the list, and I can engage with any of you guys that may have a question. So if you do have one, please use the link. It's a big help for the show, not only this show, but all the other shows, the network as well. And it would be greatly appreciated if you guys were able to do that with any question that you may have. But that being said, we can jump into the first segment, the Chip Shot story of the day. One that has kind of made its way around the news media world a little bit. Antonio Pierce, the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, jumped on his star pass rushers podcast, Max Crosby's podcast, in recent time, a few days ago, if my memory serves me right. He had some interesting quotes. It was a good conversation. I watched the show. Big fan of Antonio Pierce and what he's done there in Las Vegas. And I watched it, and the main thing that a lot of people are running with, tuning into, was the comments that he made regarding Patrick Mahomes and applying a sort of Jordan-style rules that the bad boy Pistons applied to Michael Jordan in his career. Just being overly aggressive with him. Anytime he went to the hoop, there was always some sort of contact after the whistle, before the whistle, and not even letting him get off in his jump to go to the basket. Very aggressive style of play back then, obviously, that kind of stuff, you don't see it now really in any sport, to go beyond the rules and the whistle. And Antonio Pierce made it a point to try and play that sort of style with Patrick Mahomes. And he almost, if you remember to that game on Christmas, he almost kind of gave you a blueprint to what he was talking about in that game. Obviously, the Raiders won that game. It was a shocking defeat for the Chiefs because I'm pretty sure it was in Kansas City. And the thing that stood out to me the most was the defense. Las Vegas Raiders got to Patrick Mahomes, got in his face, really collapsed the pocket pretty well that game, and forced not only Patrick Mahomes to, be off timing with his receivers and tight ends and stuff like that. He threw a pick six, I think, to start the second half. They got to him a lot. They sacked him a bunch, and he just looked very beat up after that game. The Raiders won it, and that was a huge win for Antonio Pierce and the Raiders. And, he kind of wants to build off of that. His exact quote was, or part of it, I should say, was, anytime he came to the hole, elbows, feeling him, love taps, were in his head mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. That was just a little snippet of the quote Antonio Pierce said on Max Crosby's podcast. And, it got a lot of people talking, and I thought it was pretty interesting how some people reacted to it. I don't think anybody took it too seriously for now. I think once the season starts and the Raiders do play the Chiefs, I think that'll be the talking point a lot. Yeah, we're going to probably see some chippiness, some extracurriculars in that game. And it'll only make the game more entertaining for people like us, the fans watching. And I just think it'll add a little bit of extra flavor, a little extra spice to that game, because once you go into that game, the Chiefs are only going to get better. And once you see that game scheduled, a lot of people already have in their minds that the Chiefs could run away with that game. They're favored in probably all their division games. And I just think that adds a little bit more dimension to this game, another dimension that we don't see often. Me being a Steelers fan, you can see it in some games when the Steelers play the Ravens, but in other games, you don't really see it too much. You do see it in Cowboys games when they play the Eagles, the Giants, really anybody in that division. You can throw the Commanders in there sometimes, but other divisions, you don't really see that sort of chippiness, that nastiness that you can get with these games, and that just makes them a bit more interesting, a bit more entertaining for us. Now, will it make it more entertaining? Absolutely, I think so. Will it have any effect on trying to intimidate Patrick Mahomes? Maybe not. He's, I don't have to come on here and say how good he is. I'm sure everybody knows by now what kind of talent he has, but, it's a way to try to take him out of his zone, annoy him, bother him. He's gotten into it with Max Crosby before in the past. After a little bit extra aggressiveness that Max Crosby showed after a play, Patrick Mahomes didn't like it, and it actually lit a fire under him. He played better, and they won that game pretty comfortably, if I'm not wrong. But I think the latest time it worked out for the Raiders. And to say it'll intimidate Patrick Mahomes, I don't think it'll do that, but it'll definitely add that extra sense, that extra dimension that I was talking about, and making these games more entertaining. And it's just another thing that Antonio Pierce, I think, has brought to the Raiders, just overall as a character, as a persona. He's trying to build that villain persona, though, that nasty Raiders attitude that he saw when he was younger. And obviously now it's lost its way since then. But he's trying to kind of bring that back, re-establish a culture, the attitude that he wants his team to play with. And this is the first step, and I'm a fan of it. And on top of that, I think the only thing that could make this pretty negative would be if, the league gets involved somehow. And, I'm sure they're going to be paying extra attention to these games now because of the comments made by Antonio Pierce. But I hope they don't take it too far and be extra trigger happy with the flags. They should just, let them play, let them have an extra shove or two in there. Some trash talking. To that level, I think it would be good for the game. It would be very entertaining. But, if it goes past that, yeah, fine, throw the flag. But, people want to see this extra stuff, this personality shown by their players that they always invest so much time in and come and see. And I think it just adds so much to the games as a whole. Another thing that I thought that I took away from this quote was that this could potentially be a sign that Antonio Pierce is focusing in more on, defense, trying to establish that defense and be more of a defensive identity-based team. Because offensively, they have their stars. Josh Jacobs, he's a free agent, but I expect him to stay there. Devontae Adams, star wide receiver. They're missing a quarterback, obviously, but with these sort of comments, I think he's really trying to embrace the defensive side of the ball, that ugly, tough defense that they could really establish there. And, if he's saying this sort of stuff now, it kind of makes me think maybe they target this in the draft. He's going to try and go after some big-name defensive players to not only come there, but to really invest a lot of time in these guys and show them what he's building, the kind of culture that he's building, and get them to buy in and really be an invested member of the Raiders community. And these sort of comments just makes me think he's trying to identify his team with more of a defensive nastiness going into next season. And, they had some interest for the defensive coordinator, Patrick Graham. He's likely to return to the Raiders, but he had some other offers out there for other coaching positions and stuff like that. But it's a positive that he gets to stay around, just to build off of the point I'm making that they get another year with Patrick Graham. Now Antonio Pierce is running things. He is in charge of most of this stuff, and these guys can really form that bond on the defensive side that I think will only help this team overall, because offensively, like I mentioned, they're missing a quarterback, a real sort of leader on that side of the ball to drive the offense. But if you rely on the defense and have a really good established defense that could carry you or keep you in games for most of the season, most of the time during a game, it'll make your offense kind of loosen up a little bit. They won't be so tight going out there thinking, oh, we have to score points this drive or else we're going to lose. If you have a good defense, it'll definitely make it a lot easier for your offense, at least make them a bit more relaxed to go out there and just play fine. And I assume they'll be in close games this season. I expect them to be in a lot of close games. They'll win a good amount, and they'll definitely probably lose more than not. But I do love what Antonio Pierce is building. I love the quote. I thought it was awesome that he says that. He's never shy about saying anything that he's feeling, and I think he's going to be good for the Raiders moving forward. Trying to attack Patrick Mahomes and defend Patrick Mahomes to the best that he can. But speaking on Patrick Mahomes, another quarterback that's been in the news a lot recently, it's Kenny Pickett. What his situation looks like with the Steelers, and how long will he be in Pittsburgh? Terry Bradshaw came to his defense recently on the Rich Eisen show. I have more on that story that we can dive into. I'm going to send it to a quick break right now, but like I mentioned, that story will be up next, and I'll go into that more of what Terry Bradshaw said and what he thought on the Justin Fields rumors as well. So don't go anywhere. I'll bring you that story right after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it,
some noose if it's some loose shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. If you're just joining the show now and weren't able to catch that first segment, I gave you the usual chip shot segment of the day and talked about Antonio Pierce's comments on applying the old Jordan rules to the new, what he's calling the new Patrick Mahomes rules, and how he's going to try and defend Patrick Mahomes, my reaction to that, and what it kind of meant, what I thought it kind of meant going forward for this Raiders team. But now I can jump into the second story that I have for you guys, and that being the situation with Terry Bradshaw and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, mostly the quarterback position of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Currently, Kenny Pickett is the only quarterback under contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mason Rudolph is a free agent, and they just released Mitchell Trubisky. So that just remains as Kenny Pickett as the only quarterback. And he is the current starting quarterback. He was drafted by the Steelers first round in the 20th pick, if my memory serves me right. And, went to Pitt, spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh. He's a New Jersey kid, actually. Grew up in Ocean Township, went to high school in Ocean Township, then went to Pitt. Spent all his 4 years in Pitt, got to know the facilities. And if you didn't know, the University of Pittsburgh shares some of their building facilities with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he was always in and around the building. He kind of got that nostalgia love at first with the fans. He's a local Pittsburgh kid. And, the fans gravitated towards him early. But, after some struggles, first 2 years in the league, it has been a lot of ups and downs. He's been injured, different coordinators, trying to get his O-line healthy and just improving overall, trying to get on the same page with his receivers. It has all been a lot. It's been a lot of a whirlwind for Kenny Pickett and the Steelers, and, he hasn't produced, like I mentioned, to the highest of standards, and a lot of people are starting to question if he's the guy for the job going forward, and there's a lot of questions around that. A lot of people give their opinions on that. One of them recently was Terry Bradshaw. He was a guest on the Rich Eisen show recently, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. And, Rich asked him about it, what he thought on the whole Kenny Pickett situation. And he said directly, "I love Pickett. I know him well. He's fiercely competitive. He's a tough-minded kid. Things don't bother him. I really like him a lot." He has a close connection with Kenny Pickett. I'm sure they've communicated, talked over the last 2 years. He's gotten to know him, so he's personally on good terms with Kenny Pickett. He believes in him and everything like that. Rich later asked him about the whole Justin Fields trade scenario that it has been all over the sports world media, and Terry Bradshaw gave his honest thoughts. He said, "I say that's a huge mistake. You don't need Fields. Stay with what you've got. Just build him up. Get him another receiver. Get him an explosive tight end. Give him another tackle, another guard. Have the ability to protect him." And I thought those were very interesting words to use. Very interesting suggestions because it led me down a lot of different ways with this. When he says get him another receiver, another explosive tight end, another tackle, another guard. Their O-line isn't great. They drafted a tackle, Broderick Jones. He had a pretty good first season in the NFL. He's a left tackle in my opinion, and they had him over at right tackle most of the year. So I think he can improve if they move him over to the left. They have got new pieces on there. Isaac Seumalo from the Eagles played a great season in my opinion. Definitely a major upgrade for that O-line. James Daniels on the other side, another solid right guard that I don't think allowed a sack this year. The left tackle was Dan Moore. That's an area where I think you can improve. Their center as well, Mason Cole, actually was released today. On my way over here to the studio, I saw the news that he was released. So that is a hole that they need to fill, obviously, but I don't think this entire O-line is in shambles, not by any means. They had some great games running the ball, especially, and I think they're starting to switch over to that identity. But this O-line was a big reason for that, and they performed pretty well in some games, held up pretty well against the pass as well in those games. So, the O-line isn't in shambles. Get him another receiver, I guess. Deontay Johnson and George Pickens are they're solid. George Pickens definitely has a higher ceiling, has that freak athletic talent that a lot of people like to point out. And Deontay Johnson is a good route runner. I think he's kind of struggled over these last few years. The constant quarterback switching, offensive coordinator switching, I think has really affected him the most and his production. And, he went a whole season without scoring a single touchdown. And he kind of got on the same page with Pickett, but sometimes, the throws weren't there. They weren't on the same page. And it looked off. Same with George Pickens, where the situation that he was in he made it a big deal sometimes on the sidelines when he would react in a bad way. His body language seemed down and everything. He wanted the ball more, and it just wasn't going to him. Pat Freiermuth is another good tight end. He had a great year last year, and now this past season wasn't really involved too much, and he got hurt, which played a part in it. But I was very confused as to why he wasn't really getting the targets that I expected. And a lot of it was on Matt Canada. A lot of the story of the year for the Pittsburgh Steelers was Matt Canada. It was heard everywhere, not even in Steelers games. The Fire Canada chants. And it got to a point where Mike Tomlin, I think, was forced to do it. It wasn't, I forget how he worded it. It was something along the lines of, it got to a point where Matt Canada, it wasn't good for Matt Canada to always hear that, and he couldn't perform to his ability if he were to stick around with everybody just chanting for him to leave. So Mike Tomlin made that change. A new coordinator came in, Mike Sullivan, and Eddie Faulkner were promoted as co-coordinators, and it worked for the first game against the Bengals. They posted their first 400 total yards game in a long time. I forget exactly the year, but it was like a crazy stat. And then after that, I think Kenny got hurt, and then it kind of all started stuttering. The flow wasn't really there anymore other than that Bengals game. They struggled a lot. That's when they really switched over to the running game, and now Kenny's in a situation where he didn't finish off the year. It was Mason Rudolph, and the reports have been that some Steelers receivers prefer that Mason Rudolph be signed back again and have a fair shot of it. And, he played great those last few games. Don't get me wrong. He took advantage of the situation. He had nothing really to lose. He was playing with nothing to lose. He went in there. He threw it without really a care, thinking twice about it. And he performed very well. Had big games like against the Bengals again. George Pickens had a monster day. Mason Rudolph had some great numbers, and it was a good win at home, and it actually got them into the playoffs. They played well enough to make it into the tournament, and traveling to Buffalo is always not going to be favorable with a backup quarterback, even a third-string quarterback, which was what Mason was, because they gave more game time to Mitch Trubisky, and he performed the worst out of all three. And now they gave it to Mason. He was able to do something with it. And now, how do you respond to all that? Mason Rudolph finished off the year strong. He's a free agent. And you have Kenny still on the roster signed to the team. And, kind of just to give it some context, diving more into Kenny's performances, he's gotten hurt both seasons. I think he played 13 or 14 games his first year, and this year he just played 12. In total, in those 2 years, he's thrown 13 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. Again, to give you a bit more of context, Joshua Dobbs, Joe Flacco, Desmond Ridder, and Aiden O'Connell all threw 13 or 12 touchdowns just this past season. If you take a moment to think about that, that's pretty incredible. For a quarterback, again, those are just numbers. You have to dive deeper into it, the context, the O-line, the coordinator, everything. On top of that, I saw some comments made, I want to say today, that I saw on ESPN by former quarterback Tim Hasselbeck. He made a good point that I thought was interesting and right to some extent when he said that, Kenny Pickett came in after his full 4 years in college at Pitt. He was familiar with the situation around in and around the building. He knew what the Pittsburgh Steelers meant, what kind of football they played. He didn't come in with this narrative around him that he was supposed to be a developmental project, get him in a year or two, trying to develop him, and then he's good to go. He came in as like a seasoned college player, and, he talked about how his ceiling was low coming in already, and when he came in, he was like 24 years old, and now, after 2 seasons gone, he's going to be 26, and you never saw that jump, that calmness, that comfortability that you see from a seasoned guy that I think a lot of people thought he could have been. And a lot of people will point to the Steelers jumping the gun a little bit with their quarterback situation. That quarterback class of Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis got hyped up a lot in the combine and leading up to the draft, I think, with, some videos that you saw of Malik Willis making some crazy throws, the performances at the combine, and everybody knew that the Steelers needed a quarterback. And, the argument could be made that they jumped the gun, and there are legitimate reasons now that I just mentioned with the stats and everything that support that idea. But at the same time now, you're kind of ushering in a new era with Arthur Smith. You get to keep Mike Sullivan, keep Eddie Faulkner on staff, and you brought in a lot of other coordinators to really focus in on certain parts of the offense. I think there's a passing game coordinator, maybe a running game coordinator. I forget just off the top of my head, but the Steelers have a bigger staff now that I think are that'll benefit this team. And on top of all that, they hired someone out of house. That's another thing that the Steelers really struggled with doing. They always promote people from within the organization, from within the staff of the former head coach former coordinator that didn't perform well. And, you can only do that so much and think that things will end up differently. If you're just promoting from within, it's hard for anybody that just got promoted to completely make it a 180 turn and change the style completely to what it used to. It's almost unlikely that they're going to do that. It's going to be some iteration of what you've already been doing. So hiring Arthur Smith, bringing in someone from the outside that didn't have the best of success in Atlanta as a head coach. They were pretty underwhelming, and a lot of it was made that he didn't throw to his weapons. He didn't use them right. But I think that I believe truly that some coaches are way better as coordinators focusing in on one area of the game of football than they are as a head coach where they have a multitude of different responsibilities on a team, trying to keep everybody happy and stuff like that. Arthur Smith is clearly one of those coaches. I think he strives better, performs better as an offensive coordinator. Just looking at his time back as the Tennessee Titans coordinator, he had a lot of success with Derrick Henry, establishing the run game, and with two great backs like Jalen Warren and Najee Harris, I think he could do very well with those two. Trying to rebuild the O-line is always going to be a process. I expect them to address that, and they probably will in the draft or free agency. And that all just helps the quarterback alleviate them a little bit better. Ryan Tannehill isn't a household name to a lot of fans, but in the time that Arthur Smith was there, he had arguably the best years of his career. He I forget what category she led the NFL, but he was up there and performing a lot better than a lot of people would give him credit to. Performed pretty decent in the playoffs with Arthur Smith as well. And I just think it could all kind of restart here, and the Steelers have an opportunity now to start fresh with these recent hires and trying to build this offense finally, because they have a lot of talent, and I think it would be a huge waste if they weren't to take some action and do something about their quarterback situation now, sooner rather than later, because of the pieces that they have, the defense especially that they have. Cam Hayward's not getting any younger. TJ Watt is, I think, going to be 29, 30-ish in the next season or two. So you got to really jump on this opportunity now and seize the moment, because this period of dancing around the playoffs could go away in a positive way and in a bad way. You could jump on it and be a playoff contender for a few years now with a good quarterback, or it could go really bad and you lose those defensive stars and you still have no quarterback, and then you're really trailing the pack and you have no presumable light at the end of the tunnel if it all goes bad. But we'll see. I think Kenny Pickett does deserve a chance to prove himself again with somebody new coming in, new ideas, fresh faces around. So he'll get the opportunity, certainly, but I think it's vital for them to find some competition. It doesn't even have to be Fields. A lot of rumors have been made about Russell Wilson. They could bring in Ryan Tannehill if they really want to. A lot of Jimmy G reports that have been surfacing recently, or address someone in the draft is an option, but I don't think it's likely. If you're going to go in the later rounds, you might as well get someone that's played in the NFL. So I expect him to do that. Justin Fields will always be there and will probably still be in the news going forward, but it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out with free agency starting to pick up a little bit more, teams starting to make moves. One of those moves could be Saquon Barkley, potentially going to a new team. It's unlikely that he'll sign with the Giants, and he's been active on social media, and that has led people to think that he's potentially signing with one specific team. And could it be possible? I would love it to be. I will talk to you guys more about that after I send it to a quick break. On the other side, I'll break it down a little bit more and give you some more specifics as to what Saquon's been doing and who that team could be that he's become very active in following over the last few days. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with two more stories after the break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. The second half of the show here about to begin in a few seconds. But if you missed the last segment, I talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers, some comments made by Terry Bradshaw, and just branching out after those comments, what it could mean for the Steelers, some of my ideas of what has led to some of the struggles and what could be just on the horizon if some moves were to be made, and through the draft coming up, free agency, what their quarterback situation could look like and what it could mean for them. I was going to talk about Saquon Barkley now, his recent Instagram activities, and it has a lot of people talking about, he's about to join this team because of this, similar to the Justin Fields stuff. And I'll get into that, but right before I do, I want to please remind you guys again to use the tip and donations link there running across the ticker with any questions that you may have during the show, want to engage with it. Using this link there just puts the question at the top of the list, and I'm able to see it better, see it pop up here down the line as they come in. And it's a big help for the network, the show, and everything if you guys were able to do that with any question that you may have. The tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Greatly appreciate it if you guys could do that with any questions that may pop into your guys' head during the show. Greatly appreciated. But the third segment, like I mentioned, Saquon Barkley giving away some hints of where he could end up this coming season. Again, social media is taking over the world. These guys are always active. People look to these outlets to get any tells, any indication of what these players could be doing, start any rumors, get any inclination that they could be leaning towards one way. Anyone's going to run with it. And Saquon Barkley on Instagram, it was reported on an article posted by CBS by Jeff Kerr. He stated that Barkley on his Instagram followed 4 Texans players: Brevin Jordan, Tank Dell, CJ Stroud, and Nico Collins. Now, already that is ringing alarm bells because on this show I've talked about it. I thought that Saquon Barkley, were he to go to the Houston Texans, could make this team a perennial AFC conference contender. I think with what Saquon's able to offer them on a minimal contract, like I talked about yesterday with the running back market being not so friendly to the running backs, but being extra friendly to the organizations, the teams. Getting Saquon on a minimal deal like that, probably $9 million per year for the next 3 to 4 years, while he's still in his tip-top physical prime, I think would make this Houston Texans team reach another level that they just weren't able to, and I think was lacking when you saw them play against the Ravens. They had some good moments offensively. CJ Stroud, it was his first time being in the playoffs. He was just a rookie, and a lot of those guys were young. They didn't have Tank Dell in that game. Devin Singletary is a solid back. I think he did very well in Houston to kind of bounce back from his time in Buffalo, where he had decent numbers, but I think he took it up a level with Houston and what they were able to do. DeMeco Ryans, rookie head coach, did a great job. Really all over the team, from offense to defense, did a great job with them. And now after that sort of honeymoon first season, now it's going to get a lot more serious for the Houston Texans. They're going to be the hunted definitely in their division because I don't see any of the other teams really making a push for it other than the Jaguars because they had a great start to the season, but then they tailed off at the end. But then the Colts, they're trying to bring in Anthony Richardson and bring him along, but he struggled with injuries. They had Gardner Minshew there, and you kind of almost have to restart the situation to a sense with Anthony Richardson, get him on his feet again, get him to build a rhythm finally with the Colts, because it always seemed last year that he was about to reach that rhythm, get into a flow, and then he got hurt, and then it got pretty serious with I think he got concussions, multiple concussions, and it wasn't really getting better from there. They just stuck with Minshew. Then you have the Titans, and they're in a full transition period because of the firing of Mike Vrabel. Will Levis is now, kind of got the keys of the kingdom handed to him. He's going to be probably the franchise guy going forward. He showed some good flashes. I saw him play just because I saw him play against the Steelers. He played very well in that game. He seems very poised and very, he's not afraid of the moment of making throws, sitting in the pocket, taking a hit. He's very good at that. He's very fearless, and I think he's going to do good there with the Titans, but, it's going to be his second year. He's not ready, in my opinion, to compete really at the highest level with these other guys in the AFC. And you have DeAndre Hopkins there, obviously still, but you're most likely going to lose Derrick Henry. And that leaves you with pretty much only Hopkins. Okonkwo was good, their tight end. He's athletic. He's a solid tight end option, but they're going to need way more to compete in the AFC. And they need to find some more receivers. They're probably going to target that through the draft and try to, just start this process over with Will Levis and a new head coach coming in. And I think it'll be good for them that, they kind of, it takes a lot to start over this process, and I think it'll be good for them, but they're not going to be ready, in my opinion, for a few seasons. So that only really leaves the Texans, and a lot of times you see with these teams that have these young quarterbacks, the really good organizations that invest in these quarterbacks, that see them have a good first season, and they're not satisfied with it, they go out and get them more help, more receivers, more offensive line help. They do whatever they can to go out there and help their rookie quarterback, especially if they had a bad season. You got to go out there and help them, but it's easy to think that because this guy had a phenomenal first year like C.J. Stroud had, to just, kind of kick it back a little bit, over-rely on him, and then if he plays bad next year, it throws everything into a loop. The really good organizations go out, get more help regardless, get more support for their quarterback to build on their successes, not leave them satisfied with what they did. It's what comes next that's always the hardest, especially the second year, because there's now expectations there for C.J. Stroud, the Houston Texans. It's his performance and the performance from all these young guys like Tank Dell. Nico Collins is still a young receiver in the league. It's revitalized the whole city of Houston that was a pretty constant playoff contender a few years back when they had Bill O'Brien, Deshaun Watson, DeAndre Hopkins. Then that whole situation with Deshaun Watson happened and Bill O'Brien, and then it all just started losing its momentum. All the pieces just started falling off, and everybody left, and then they just left the Texans to in a really bad situation, and just really instantly in a short amount of time after they had that period with Davis Mills as their quarterback, they brought in DeMeco Ryans. He established the defense a little bit more with Christian Harris. They drafted Will Anderson. They had a boatload of picks. Their defense, like I just mentioned, is young. They identified themselves with defense first, and then once C.J. Stroud came in, it all flowed and all connected very easily, because I think it's a good thing to have all these young guys in there. They're able to bond a lot quicker if they're all around the same age and all trying to figure this out together. It's like a whole big extended draft class over the last 2 to 3 years that these guys are able to bond over, share stuff with, and grow together. And I think that was a big part of their success this year. And to add to that, they just had a very good first year. Their defense is great with Jalen Petrie, Steven Nelson, Christian Harris, Will Anderson, like I mentioned. Now, how can you build on that? And that's where Saquon Barkley comes in, where this whole conversation started. Get that X-factor running back that adds to this offense, because the offense was explosive. It shocked a lot of people how well C.J. Stroud played. But again, those expectations come in. Teams are able to game plan around you. So you got to bring in that different X-factor, catalyst sort of player that can switch up the identity of this team, switch up rhythms, the pace of it. A lot of times, C.J. Stroud was throwing a lot in games last season, and you kind of want to take that pressure off of him. You bring Saquon in, a guy of his caliber, still 27 to 26 years old. He's able to take some of the pressure off of him. Better O-line situation, better offense. It's going to help C.J. Stroud, like I mentioned, but it's also going to do wonders for Saquon, that came off a pretty solid season for being on the Giants, and everybody knows where the Giants are at right now. They're in like this very weird gray area where they're not really sure what to do with the quarterback because they paid him so much money. He put up 962 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, 3.9 yards per carry, and had over 1,200 yards in scrimmage yards. Undoubtedly the best player, and he almost put up 1,000 rushing yards on that team. Imagine what he could do now with the Houston Texans, and just adding to that young core, being almost a veteran in a sense because of all those guys being young, like I mentioned. And I think not only the biggest thing will be that it'll help the Texans obviously a lot offensively when they're in those games against the Chiefs. Trying to keep Patrick Mahomes on the sideline, running the ball is always the way to go, is always the solution that everybody brings up. Keeping Patrick Mahomes on the sidelines, taking your time on offense if you bring in Saquon, it'll only increase your chances of doing that. And I believe it'll just take this team to a whole nother level, and it will make them a lot more exciting, fun to watch. And I'm hoping that this move happens because I was a fan of watching C.J. Stroud and how easy he made it look. The young energy is always around the NFL with the young players. It's always cool to see, and if they're having a lot of success, it's a lot more fun to see them play. And I thought the Texans had a great first year, good first impression, made it to the playoffs, gave the Ravens a good run for their money until the second half of that game. And adding Saquon will only add to that. And I see very bright things happening for them in the future if they're able to make this type of blockbuster free agent signing for themselves and for C.J. Stroud. And in the AFC, there'll be a big problem to deal with. For the other teams I wanted to talk about now in the last segment, the Jaguars and the Chargers are most likely to scenario coming up in the last part of the show. I'm going to send it to a quick break right now, and I'll talk about that on the other side of the break. Who is most likely to return to the NFL playoffs between the Jaguars and the Chargers? That conversation is coming up after this short break. Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last time this episode and this week, talking about a hypothetical scenario that I wanted to bring up to you guys. Who is most likely to return to the playoffs, the Jaguars or the Los Angeles Chargers? After last season, two very different teams at certain points and two very similar teams the way it ended. The Chargers finished with the second worst record in the AFC at 5-12, and the Jaguars lost their last 5 of 6 games on their schedule to get kicked out of the playoffs and not make the playoffs after starting a very promising season at 8-3. Like I mentioned, they lost their last 5 of their 6 games, were knocked out of the playoffs, and it was pretty disappointing because of the offseason that they had jumping into the Jaguars side of things. They, signed Calvin Ridley. He was going to add to that wide receiver room with Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne as their running back. Pretty solid old line overall, but Trevor Lawrence was kind of stepping into his own, getting pushed into that upper second from the top level of quarterbacks. The top level is the Mahomes, the Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. They're at the top of the list. Lamar Jackson, they're at the top. And then Trevor Lawrence was kind of elevating himself, I thought, to that second tier of quarterbacks because they started the year so well, 8-3, and it looked like offensively Doug Peterson had him playing very well, running the ball. Trevor Lawrence looked decisive and very accurate with his throws. And then they kind of hit that bump in the road. From what I saw, it just looked like Travis Etienne got hurt, and then after that, they weren't really able to reestablish that running game that they had going early in the year, where Etienne had his best part of the season. Then he put up, 45 rushing yards, 30-something, 60-something, and it forced Trevor to throw a little bit more, and he made some more mistakes down the line, and I think that cost them in games where you need to be able to run the ball against good defenses like they played in the Bucs, the Ravens, the Browns. They struggled in all those games. They lost all those games, and I think that cost them there in the end. And on the Chargers side of things, from the get-go, there were some moments where you saw Justin Herbert. Just looking at this roster, it's crazy to think that in some moments it looked as if this offense was playing as they should. A star wide receiver, Keenan Allen. Mike Williams gets hurt pretty badly, so he's going to be out. And then you have Austin Eckler coming off of a great season. And the oddest thing for me this past season was the performance of Austin Eckler. I know he was hurt a good amount of it, and they were being cautious with him, but to have that sort of fall off was crazy to me because he was such a big part of their offense. To not have him involved really at all, you get results like you did this past season with the Chargers. Justin Herbert, I think, was forced now to throw it more, carry the team on his back a lot more, and he delivered in some moments, but I think some of his other players let him down. I just jumped to the game they had against the Packers where he made a phenomenal throw, and I think I'm not going to remember the name of their first-round receiver right now. It just slipped my mind, the name of him. The wide receiver from TCU, their first-round pick. He made a great throw to him, and he just dropped the ball, and they ended up losing that game. And then, throwing the ball so much could come at a risk, and he got hurt because of it. He hurt his hand, and after that, I think he was never really the same. They just ended their season with a very bad taste in their mouth. Brandon Staley was always in the news, it seemed, answering questions about, the morale of this team. Where do you go with them playing like this? The defense wasn't really great at all at some points, regardless of all the stars that they had. Derwin James, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack was up there in the sack race. They were just missing other pieces there. Their corners aren't really anything great. It's not Kenneth Walker. I was about to say Kenneth Walker as their linebacker. Kenneth Murray, their linebacker from Oklahoma. He's solid, but I think you need a lot more than just those guys. They need more interior pressure on the defensive tackle side. So all those things kind of culminated into them having the season that they did. Teams were able to run the ball all over them. They really stood up to nobody when they were sort of punched in the mouth by other teams' offenses, and they weren't able to respond because all their players almost got hurt. Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, and then you only really had Keenan Allen, but people can take him away by doubling him, tripling him if they have to, and then you have to rely on these other guys who clearly weren't ready for the moment. And the Chargers, now I think we go into a spot with both of these teams where they head into this offseason in similar situations because they have the quarterback, they have some weapons there that are X-factor kind of weapons, number one receivers, number one running backs, and both of these teams are really missing that defense, and now they're kind of sort of even on the coaching level because Doug Peterson was definitely a better hire than Brandon Staley. The stats, the results speak for themselves. He's still there, and he's a Super Bowl winning coach, has that experience. But now the Chargers bring in Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, very successful season at Michigan. They won the national championship, and he's had also prior success in the NFL with the 49ers, most recently going to that Super Bowl playing against his brother. He was able to lead that organization, that 49ers organization, into some very good, successful years. Up until now, Kyle Shanahan has arrived there, and now they're kind of back to that. But in between there, it wasn't looking too hot for the 49ers. And I think he's going to do great for the Chargers. And it's going to definitely help Justin Herbert a lot because of his experience, like I mentioned, in the NFL and playing for the Chargers, being a quarterback as well. That sort of relationship, it's hard to find anywhere else. And I think with Brandon Staley, he was never really able to tap into that full potential that Justin Herbert has because I believe he can be up there with the Mahomes, with the Joe Burrows, those caliber guys, Josh Allen, if he had a coach to really push him to do that, really tap into his full potential. I have full confidence in Jim Harbaugh to do that. And now these teams are very parallel in where they're at in their, growth process. Good coaches, in my opinion. Solid offensive pieces. Great quarterbacks. They're both missing that defensive side of the ball. The Jaguars have decent pieces like Trayvon Walker. Devin Lloyd is a good pickup, I thought, drafting him. Josh Allen, the Jaguars have to make sure they tag him at least if they're not able to extend them because of the kind of season that he had. And their D-line is great, but then you get up to those further levels up the field, and it's starting to look a bit bare, if you would, with their corners, their safeties, and up to that level. Same with the Chargers. It's very interesting, these similarities that they have. And on top of all those similarities that I listed, the question is who's most likely to return to the playoffs. It's funny that the last time these two teams were in the playoffs, they played against each other back in 2021 in the wild card round. The Chargers actually had a lead, 27-7 at halftime, and I'm sure most of you know how it ended. The Chargers only scored 3 points in the second half compared to the Jaguars' 24, and they completed the comeback and eliminated the Chargers. A lot of people felt that Brandon Staley was going to be fired after that. I probably was one of those people, because after you have a result like that, it's hard for the organization to push you for a whole other season and have that much confidence in you. And, he got fired this season. And in that game, the coaching and the wherewithal from really the coaching was what stood out, because Doug Peterson never wavered, was never really rattled by it, knew there was a whole other half of football. I think he kind of gave his energy, his calmness out to the rest of the team, and they were able to go out there with confidence that they were still in this game, and it showed. Brandon Staley, never really been there, inexperienced coach at that, crumbled in that moment, for a lack of a better term, and it showed. And now the Chargers and Jags find themselves trying to recover after a pretty bad season this past season, not coming close to the playoffs, at least for the Chargers. And if I were to pick, finally, which of these teams I think has a better chance of making the playoffs, I would probably go with the Chargers, because we know what we're going to get out of Doug Peterson, most likely, and Trevor Lawrence. They could only get better, I think, because they showed that potential, but it just died off. I think it's a lot easier to withstand that potential after another season under your belt, building on it, acknowledging those mistakes, and getting better after that. Not to mention they're in an easier division by default, because they don't have Patrick Mahomes in it. And the Chargers are in a tougher division, like I mentioned there. And I have confidence in Jim Harbaugh to have success there, but he has a lot of things to iron out, because the Chargers are in a difficult situation with their cap space and stuff like that, and all their stars, because they're over the cap limit, and they might have to make some big decisions on a Joey Bosa, a Khalil Mack, Keenan Allen, these sort of stars that have a big cap hit of like 30 to something, $40 million in cap hit. They're going to have to make some decisions, iron out some things before I really believe that Jim Harbaugh can establish himself there with his way of playing football, his true identity. I think he's going to build up that defense a lot more, make them better than they already are, or at least tap into that potential that Joey Bosa, Derwin James can really tap into, even Kenneth Murray as well. Khalil Mack's a little bit older. Just off the top of my head, I think he'd be one that they try to restructure his deal or potentially release him and, get his contract off and have him be a cap casualty because of it. But we'll see where that goes. I think Jim Harbaugh has a longer list of to-dos than Doug Peterson does, because he's already taken over that team, molding it into what he wants it to be. And they're just further along in the process because, Jim Harbaugh is just stepping back into this organization. I do expect him to be better, a lot better with Jim Harbaugh. But comparing the two, I think the Jaguars will make it better. Easier division, easier path to the playoffs and returning to that spot. How far they'll go, that's up to you guys to decide. But answering that question, I think the Jaguars are much suited to have that success in the coming season than the Jaguars. But again, let me know what you guys think. And, is there other factors that play into the equation? Do you think Jim Harbaugh is going to come in and just have success right away? Do you think the Jaguars are going to maybe fall off after last year? Last year could have been an anomaly of sorts. If you believe that, let me know what you guys think. I'm always interested with your engagement. But that will do it for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. At whatever point you did, watch the whole thing or just bits and pieces of it. Your engagement and following and likes also mean a lot, so please make sure to follow and like the show. And again, please subscribe to it as well and comment on the show, as well as following us on any other social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, for more content on not only just football and sports, but there's a whole other boatload of things that the podcast network provides. So make sure to check that out on other platforms. For more of this NFL, football, and general content, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where I post YouTube shorts. Each of these individual segments has their own video on just the topics I talked about today. If you would as well, like and follow those. But for now, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. Again, saying thank you and wishing you guys an awesome weekend. What better way to start it than watching this episode of the GSMC Football Podcast? So take care, and I will see you guys all on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.